Hi everyone and welcome back to Ink of the Middle Kingdom. I'm Evan, your host. I'm someone who's endlessly curious about how history and philosophy can actually help us in our daily lives.
And I'm Bella. I'm a historian who loves exploring how the past shapes the way we think and live today.
Every episode, we take a story, an idea, or a moment from history and unpack the wisdom behind it.
And we talk about how those lessons can guide us, whether it's making better decisions, finding balance, or just understanding people a little better.
Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in.
Okay, Bella, so today we're tackling a massive transformation. For centuries, ancient China was this whole patchwork of different states. And then, boom, suddenly it's one giant unified empire. How on earth did that happen so fast?
It's a fantastic question, Evan. And the answer is a perfect storm, really. It all comes down to how a couple of technologies, things that seem pretty simple on the surface, completely change the rules of the game.
Okay, so where does the story start?
It starts with the way people fought. Before this huge shift, warfare was what we'd call ritual war. It was almost gentlemanly, fought only by nobles.
Wait, so war was polite?
In a way, yeah. The goal wasn't to destroy your enemy. It was to restore something they called Li, which is this idea of cosmic balance and proper order. So think of it less like a brutal battle and more like a very serious, very formal duel.
Exactly. There's this great line from an old text, the Zhuan, that says, "The great affairs of the state are sacrifice and war." That tells you everything you need to know. War was seen as this sacred duty, right up there with religious ceremonies.
So it was all about following a strict code, proving you were more noble, more in tune with the right way of doing things.
Precisely. Only the aristocracy could even participate.
Okay, that sounds so different from what we think of as war. It's almost like a dangerous sport for the elite. But obviously that didn't last. So what was the turning point? How did this formal duel become a no-holds-barred fight to the death?
Well, it started when one state decided to just ignore the rules.
There's always one.
Right? It was the state of Chu. They were considered outsiders, almost barbarians, by the central kingdoms. And they just didn't care about this whole complex system of Li. When they fought to win, period. And that put everyone else in a terrible position. Either you stick to your honorable traditions and get wiped out, or you adopt Chu's brutal methods and fight to survive.
So Chu was like the first domino to fall, showing everyone that winning was way more important than how you played the game. But that kind of all-out war must have required so many more resources, more soldiers, more everything. What allowed that to even happen?
This is where our technology comes in. And the first piece is something that sounds almost comically simple. Iron tools and plows pulled by oxen.
That's it? Farm equipment?
That's it. But that one change completely revolutionized the economy from the ground up.
And the second piece of tech was even more subtle. It was a new way to write things down on simple, cheap strips of bamboo.
Bamboo strips? Okay, I'm definitely not seeing how these two things lead to a super empire yet.
Stick with me. Before this, writing was done on super expensive bronze containers. Only the absolute richest nobles could afford it. Bamboo basically democratized information.
Okay, let's connect the dots. Those new iron plows made farming way more efficient. Suddenly, a single peasant family could grow more food than they needed. So they started leaving the big collective farms owned by the local lords and started their own private farms on unused land. And the king saw an opportunity there, a huge one. The monarchs went directly to these peasants and said, "We'll protect you, and in return, you pay your taxes directly to us." This completely cut out the local nobles, who suddenly saw their entire economic power base just vanish.
That's fascinating. So the king and the common farmer basically team up against the local lords. The monarchs get the money and the manpower for these bigger armies. So where do the bamboo slips, the second technology, fit in? Well, because it was so cheap to write on bamboo, literacy started to spread. It wasn't just for the high nobility anymore. This created a brand new class of people, educated men who didn't have inherited land or titles. They were called wandering scholars. So kings could just hire these guys?
Exactly.
Instead of relying on a powerful, independent noble who might try to overthrow him, a monarch could hire these smart, educated guys as professional managers, as bureaucrats, to run the state for him.
And here's the really clever part. Monarchs loved to hire these scholars from other states.
Oh, I get it. An outsider has no local family ties, no land, no independent power. Their whole career depends on keeping the king happy.
You got it.
They were the perfect tools for the monarch. They were loyal only to the man who paid their salary. This is what allowed kings to push through massive, centralizing reforms, what they called bienfa.
Wow. So everything is just being turned upside down. The old nobles are losing power, this new class of professional managers is taking over, and war is becoming unimaginably brutal. I can't imagine living through a time like that. It's like the entire foundation of your world is just crumbling. How did people even process that?
Well, that chaos, that feeling of free fall, is exactly what sparked one of the most intellectually fertile periods in all of human history. It's known as the 100 Schools of Thought. Because everyone was trying to answer the same basic question, right? With the old world gone, what do we do now? How are we supposed to live? That was the question on everyone's mind. And 3 major schools of thought emerged with very, very different answers.
The first big answer came from the Confucians. They looked at all the chaos and basically said, the problem is that we've forgotten who we are. We've abandoned our traditions. So their solution was to go back in time? Essentially, yes. Confucius summed it up as subdue oneself and return to propriety. They believed the only path forward was to look backward and restore the moral order and the rituals of a supposed golden age.
Okay, so that's option 1, bring back the good old days. What was option 2?
Option 2 was the complete opposite. The legalists thought the Confucians were hopelessly naive. One legalist philosopher, Han Feizi, mocked them. He said trying to rule with old traditions was like sitting by a tree stump, hoping another rabbit just happens to run into it and kill itself.
Ha! That's a great line.
It is. For legalists, tradition was useless. The only thing that mattered was power. And the solution was to build a new, ruthlessly efficient state based on strict, impersonal laws and political maneuvering.
So, we have restore past morality, or forge ahead with ruthless laws. What was the third path? The third path was to just walk away from the whole game. This was the Taoist answer. The philosopher Zhuangzi tells this incredible story about a friend who became a powerful minister. Let me guess, the friend was worried Zhuangzi wanted his job? Exactly. So Zhuangzi tells him about this mythical phoenix that sees an owl clutching a rotting rat. The owl shrieks at the phoenix, terrified it's going to steal its disgusting prize. The point being, all this power and status everyone was fighting and killing for was, from a higher perspective, as worthless as a dead rat. The wise choice was to just withdraw.
Wow, those are 3 totally different ways of looking at the world. You've got the idealist, the pragmatist, and the person who just checks out entirely. So in the end, who won? Which of these philosophies actually shaped what happened next? Well, in the harsh reality of that era, one philosophy was just brutally effective: legalism. The states that adopted legalist reforms, centralizing power, mobilizing the entire population, became unstoppable war machines.
So it created an arms race.
A terrifying one. Every state had to reform and adopt this total war model, or they would be completely destroyed. And you can see the results in the casualty numbers. Battles went from maybe a few hundred nobles being killed to entire campaigns where hundreds of thousands of soldiers died.
And to give you a really concrete, horrifying example, after one major battle, the Battle of Changping, the winning general from the state of Qin, he captured the enemy army, and then he had all 400,000 of the surrendered soldiers executed.
400,000? My gosh. That's not war anymore. That's extermination. It just shows how completely the world had changed.
So if we trace it all the way back, it really is a chain of dominoes.
It is. It starts with those 2 simple technologies, iron and bamboo. That sparks massive social change with empowered peasants and new scholars. That, in turn, allows for huge political changes, the rise of bureaucracy.
And that new political system unlocks this terrifying military power, which leads to total war, and finally unification, because one state was just better at it than everyone else.
Exactly. The most ruthless, most thoroughly reformed state, Qin, eventually conquered everyone, creating a single empire.
What an incredible story. It shows how things we might not even notice, like a new tool or a cheaper way to write, can cascade into world-changing events. But it really leaves you with a heavy question, doesn't it? One we still deal with today.
Which is?
All of this innovation in technology and politics and philosophy, it unleashed absolute chaos before a new order was built. And it makes me wonder, can you have that kind of radical, transformative innovation without also getting that kind of extreme instability? It's a tough one to think about.